Hey, is that folk music that you play there? What is that? How do you call that folk music?
I think it was Studs Terkel who asked Big Bill Brunzi, did he consider his blues music to be folk music? And Big Bill says, well, never heard no horse.
Don't hesitate. It could be your ticket to a new tomorrow.
Once there was a wandering musician. She was a harper. She wandered from place to place, playing the harp and singing. Everywhere she went, they were happy to have her come. One day, she came to a town and a king walked out to greet her. "Welcome," he said. "We will fix a banquet for you." And so the harper followed the king. The tables were laid with white cloths, and they were filled with wonderful things to eat and good things to drink. There was drumming and singing, and the harper played for them, and they sang with her. The banquet lasted all night and into the next day. And during that time, the king asked the harper if she would stay, if she would play for him and sing for him, and if she would be his barber. Well, the musician had never thought of settling down. She certainly had never thought of being a barber. But the king said that he would give her whatever she wanted. He would build her a fine house. He would fill it with furniture, fine clothes and servants. And the more he talked, the more the musician thought that she would stay. And so she said yes. And she was set up in a fine house. And the king kept his promise and filled it with fine things. And the day came that she was to cut the king's hair. She left her house with her harp. She went to see the king, and there he was sitting in a straight chair. Next to him there was a table, and on the table there were the scissors. First of all, the harper sat and played for the king. And then she put her harp aside and went over and picked up the scissors. She started to cut the king's hair, and then she found out that there was something that she did not expect. The king had 2 horns. She carefully cut the hair of the king around the horns so they would not show. She put down the scissors, and then the king said, "Now you have found out my secret. You must never tell anyone. Will you promise that you will never tell anyone my secret?" Well, the musician thought that it was easy to take one secret with her, and so she went home. She went to sleep, and the next day she went into the market. Well, she was talking to people about ordinary things when suddenly she heard herself saying, "Did you know that the king had 2?" And she had almost told the secret. The next time she went to cut the king's hair, she played again, but her heart was not in it. And she cut the king's hair carefully around the horns. This time she went back to her house, and she carried the secret with her, and it was jiggling inside her. When she got home, she decided that she would let the servants go because she was afraid that she would tell them the secret. The next time she went to cut the king's hair, she played, but not very long. And this time, as she cut the king's hair, the secret was burning inside her. She went home to that house, that beautiful house, and she shut the windows and she closed the door, for she was afraid that the secret would get out. And the next time came that she cut the king's hair, she didn't play at all, and it was silent. She cut the king's hair and put the scissors down, and this time she went home and the secret was burning inside her. She got home into that airless house and she took to her bed. She was ill. Many days she lay there in a fever. It was all she could do to drag herself up and go to the king's. The next time it was to cut his hair. She did not even take her harp. She cut the king's hair and she went home and back to her bed. After a while, she realized that something had to be done or she would die. She gathered all her strength. She left the house and she started to walk. She walked through the town and people called her by name, but she did not look to the left or the right. She kept on walking. She walked through another village and people greeted her, but she did not speak. She kept on walking until she came to a mountain. And there she climbed up the path of the mountain. And when there was no more path, she grabbed onto roots and pulled herself up to the top of the mountain. And there she dug a hole with a stick. And she put her face into the hole and she said, "The king has 2 horns!" And then she shut the hole so that not even the echo could get out. And she breathed a sigh of relief and she let herself down the mountain. She went down the mountain path, and this time when she went through the villages and through the towns, she touched people's hands and she promised them that soon she would come and play for them. She got back to the town. She went to her house. She packed her harp and she went to the king and told him that she would no longer be his barber. She left the secret there. She put the harp on her back and she went on her way. She was light-hearted and her step was light, for she was carrying no burden of a secret. After all, a secret is a heavy burden to carry, especially if you are a wandering musician. And that's that story. Thank you very much, Gene.
All right.
That was fun. That was good.
Here we are at Horses Sing None of It. My name is Ralph Litwin, and you were just listening to the telling of Carol Titus and ably assisted on harp by Gene Farnworth. And this was one of those sort of serendipitous things that occasionally happens here at Horses Sing None of It. Carol came in and said that she was doing a story about a harper, and just by coincidence, Gene Farnworth was here with her harp. And by golly, they figured it out and put it together.
And that's the way it always is with folk stuff, I guess.
Yes, it's nice to do that collaborative thing and spur of the moment.
It felt good.
So, welcome to the show, Carol.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
That was a great story.
Thanks for asking me.
Especially like the place where she shouts into the hole.
Right, right. Don't we wish we could get rid of secrets like that? Yeah. Well, that's really 2 stories that I put together. It was a story that I heard from somebody else, and I didn't really like the way it ended. And I had another character, and I put her into the story, and when she got into the story, she worked it out entirely differently. They say writers are like that, and the characters take over. Well, I found out that's exactly the way it happened with the story. And I like the ending better.
That's
Hope
great.
you like the ending.
Yeah, I like the ending. I always like a happy ending.
Good.
I'm a happy ending kind of guy.
Good. Yeah. Well, not all my stories are happy endings, because I think that the stories reflect things that happen to everybody's life, and of course not everything is happy, but somehow they get resolved. And I like a story when it resolves into some kind of satisfying ending, even if it's not happy.
Oh no!
No, okay.
So, Carol, you tell you live in Denville here,
Do now.
locally.
Lived in Randolph Township a lot of years, up on top of the mountain. We could see the lights of New York City.
And I've seen you telling at the Morristown Unitarian Fellowship.
Yep, yep. We're going to do a big telling there in the fall. It's called Telebration. And groups from all over the country will be telling on that same night. Big proclamation is read.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and it's kind of a community of people. It's going to be storytelling for adults. And it's fun thinking that it's sort of not really campfires all over the place, but that everyone is telling at the same time.
Is that an annual event?
Yep. It was started by the National Association of Storytelling, which used to be called the National Association for the Perpetuation and Preservation of Storytelling, but now they have a common name. But I'll always think of it as NAPS. Yeah.
And that's Telebration. That happens in what month?
In November.
In November.
At the Unitarian Fellowship in Morristown. Yeah. I won't be doing it all myself. There are some wonderful tellers now. I teach storytelling for adults, and I have a group in Denville that's called Story Weavers. And we meet every month and we do story swapping. And then once in a while we do an event. And I'm really happy that we're going to do Telebration.
Oh boy,
Yeah.
that sounds fun. So if people want to get in touch with you to find out if they're interested in storytelling,
Oh, please.
if they want you to come tell us stories
If they want to know about
somewhere.
events, or if they want me as a teller, or anybody. You know, telling is alive and well, and it's really wonderful to be able to say that. A couple of years ago, well, I started this maybe 13 years ago, and people didn't know what storytelling was. They didn't know what a storyteller was. But now I say, I'm a storyteller, and people will say, oh, great, I heard one of those in Boston or Philadelphia, and they know what that is. And so, yeah, my number, and if anybody's interested, is 201-625-8548. And let me know what you want to do with story. I'd like to hear from you.
All right,
Good.
great. You have something else you want to tell us now?
Yeah. Well, I always urge people to get to the personal stories that they have, not only their own stories, but family stories. Of course, all the stories I tell are true stories. Kids ask me especially, is that true after I tell a story? And I say to them, well, all the stories I tell are true. Whether they happened or not is another thing.
That's a good way to put it.
Well, I hope so, because I think that all good stories have a truth in them. And certainly family stories are valuable for their truths, and that's why they get passed down and told at Thanksgiving tables and Christmas tables. And this story I love to tell because I didn't know that it was a story until my mother reminded me that this had happened, and I thought, yes, this is a great story, and it has a truth in it that I like to tell to people. And I call it The Color Wheel. My father was a man who liked to know how things worked. In our house, there was always a pile of popular science magazines and Popular Mechanics, Mechanics Illustrated. And I remember his saying that one of the favorite gifts he ever received was a crystal set when he was a kid, and he could make it and listen to radio. Now, we were one of the first families in our little town to have a television set. It had a little black and white screen about like this, and I don't know how we ever afforded it, but I do remember that the kids from the neighborhood would come over and they'd watch It's Howdy Doody Time, It's Howdy Doody Time, Bob Smith and Howdy Do, say howdy do to you. And I felt pretty special to have that TV set. Well, somehow my father found out that someone was thinking of doing color television. Well, he knew that he could coax radio out of some kind of crystals and wire. And I guess what went on in his mind is that he could coax color television somehow out of that little set we had in our living room. Now, I'm not sure about the technology, but there were two companies that were vying for how to do color television. One of them I know was RCA, and that was in South Jersey where we lived. And then the other was maybe Motorola. Well, anyway, my father went to visit the RCA plant, and he saw colored television. And he came back all excited, and he thought that he could probably show us color. Well, as I understand it, Motorola or that other company was was probably sending the kind of thing that we do use for color. They would send dots across the screen. Well, RCA had a different idea. They had the idea that they would send the primary colors one after the other, and if you had the equipment to pick up those colors, you could get color television. Well, what my father did was down in his workroom in the basement, he created a huge color wheel. And each of the openings of the color wheel were big enough to cover that little screen, and each one of them had, he got gels for theater lights, and they were red, blue, yellow, all the way around the color wheel. Well, I was a kid, and it was bigger than I could span like this. So I was very excited, and the day came when he was going to put the color wheel up to the set and try to get the color. Well, I ran home from school, I think it was lunchtime, and there was my father. In front of the set, he'd set up the color wheel, and my mother was sitting there watching, and I sat down in front of the set and I began to watch. My father started that motor on the wheel, and it started to turn, and we could see the red and the yellow and the green and the blue starting to go around and around, and the color wheel went faster and faster, and then the show came on, and it was some kind of cowboy riding, and for all the world it seemed as if I could see blue sky, and I could see some kind of red suit on the cowboy, and I could see yellow or brown on the ground, and I was watching color television, and all of a sudden the wheel flew off. The wheel flew all the way around the room, and it finally settled on the floor like that. Well, my father was not a person of many words. He went over and he picked up the color wheel and he took it down to the basement again. And there my mother and I would clean up the shop every once in a while, and there the color wheel was with the colors falling off one at a time, the red and the blue. And he left it there for many, many years. And I don't know if he ever expected to use it again, and he went on to other things. But I love that story because it was my father trying to figure out how something worked and trying to do it. And I sure hope that I've inherited some of that. I kind of like to know how things worked. By the way, that microphone there. So that's one of my stories. Thank you. Thanks. And I do want people to know that family stories are really something that are only yours. And it's a good idea to sit somebody down in front of a tape recorder, and maybe it's a good idea to get people talking together. Get sisters talking. You know, your aunt and your mother, get them talking together. It's kind of hard for one person by themselves. But get people talking together, and one will remind the other of the story, and just get them going about that. Ask them questions. Ask them about how it was when they came to this country. Ask them how it was when they first fell in love. Ask them how it was when they went to school. And get the stories. They are so precious. And your kids will be very happy if you do.
I agree.
Good.
My grandfather had some stories that were told about him that I put into a song, which I'm not going to play now.
Oh, foo!
It's a very long song, and it even starts with a story. And I've done it on this show on other occasions. But it's really fun to find out about your family.
Yeah.
And the thing that actually set me off writing that song was there was a neighbor to my cabinet shop who knew my grandfather because the cabinet shop used to be his horse stall. And she grew up in that neighborhood, and she was an old woman by this time, obviously, and she had been a kid who my grandfather had befriended from the neighborhood. So she had all kinds of other things to add to these stories about him, and that set me off to writing a song.
Right. Well, lots of songs are stories, and they go together.
Yep.
Yep.
I'm going to play you a little tune that has no story or song to it.
All right.
And it's called the Dallas Rag. Dallas Rag.
Okay. My father played the banjo.
Oh boy.
He played banjo and fiddle, and he sang. When I was an infant, my mom and I would listen to him on WIP and WCAU out of Philadelphia.
When he wasn't building color wheels and other contraptions.
Yeah, things like that. But unfortunately, the musician part jumped a generation with me, so I'm a storyteller instead.
Still an entertainer, though.
Yep. I think my father really was a storyteller, though, because I remember that he used to listen to Gene Shepherd on radio, as lots of people did. And he would tell me the stories the next day because it was too late for me to listen.
Right.
And he would also tell his dreams. He had wonderful dreams.
Oh, boy.
And he said he dreamed in color, and he would tell his dreams. And so I guess he really was a storyteller, after all.
Kind of sounds like he planted the seed of you becoming a storyteller there.
Maybe so. Maybe so.
Is there more to the story of how you became a storyteller?
Well, yeah, there's always that story. I heard a wonderful storyteller years ago, more years than I like to think. Her name is Laura Sims, and she's a very powerful and wonderful storyteller. She's based in New York City, and she still tells there and all around the world, I guess. She was at the fellowship in Morristown that many years ago, and I heard her, and she was telling to a room full of adults, and I think my jaw just dropped. I was overcome by the power of her story. And I thought at that time that it was not something I could do, but it really intrigued me. And so a good friend, gave me a shove, you know, the way sometimes good friends do. And I went to one of Laura's workshops. And then I went to one of her intensive workshops, and she kind of massaged me in a storytelling way. And I came out of there and advertised in a little paper and said, gee whiz, I think I could be a storyteller. So my storytelling name for kids is Tattletales. I'm a good tattletale. And I've been doing that ever since, telling for kids, telling for teenagers, telling for adults, and getting a really good time out of it. And as I said, I teach people now how to tell. And that's the way storytelling should be. It just needs to go on and on and on and on, like good music.
On and on and on.
On and
That's,
on, yeah, anonymous.
The organization for people
who talk too much. Mm-hmm. Right.
Well, we have another, I'm subtracting 4 minutes.
4 minutes?
Your little story.
Okay, yeah, okay. Here, this one's for you, Ralph.
Oh,
this
boy.
one is for you and for anybody who's on this kind of talk show, and I think you'll see why. Once a man was walking down a road, and beside the road he saw a skull. He looked down at the skull and he said, I wonder how you got here. And the skull spoke to him. Well, he picked up the skull, and he and the skull had quite a conversation. And as they talked, the man got an idea. He thought, this is a very valuable item, a skull that can talk. I will take it to the king. He will give me a lot of money. So he took the skull to the king. He had to do a lot of talking to get in to see the king, but when he did, he put the skull down in front of the king, and he said to the skull, now talk for the king. Now the skull had told him that it was easy to talk, but do you think that skull would say anything then? The skull said nothing. The king looked at the skull, and the king said, talk! But the skull said nothing. Finally, the king looked at the man, and he said, you are lucky that I am letting you go with your head. Leave me. Well, the man scooped up the skull and ran out of the place. And as he was going, the skull said, whew, that was a close call. What? The man said. You're talking now. Why is it you wouldn't talk for the king? Well, the skull said, I told you it was easy to talk, but it's not always easy to think of something to say. And that's that story. That's for you.
Very good. I like that.
Okay, when you have something, it's hard to think of something to say.
Some of my guests sometimes wonder if I'm going to say anything. They've told me that.
Oh, all right.
I'll just sit back and go and wait for them to say something.
Well, as long as you have your banjo here, you could just do that instead.
I could, and I will. I don't know how much time we have left, about 2 more minutes, so I guess I'll just play you another little tune.
I'd enjoy that.
said, stay away from her. When she walks by, the dogs all cry, but the cats all purr. She's a voodoo queen, up from New Orleans. Here she comes now, looking like the universe is hers. Voodoo Queen Marie, she ran the town of New Orleans. Ran it in her middle teens like her favorite toy. And that is fine because it's just exactly what it was. Ain't nobody, ain't no laws made to fit Queen Marie. Ain't she got the power? Don't the men folks stare? Gypsy hoops and rainbow clothes and long black shiny hair. It hangs down to her hips. She got cherry-colored lips. Other women walk on the earth, but this one sails on the air. And folks tell fabulous lies. They say the dream light shines from her eyes. Say she's a cat in disguise. Say she got horns on her head. Say she's married as well. They say she wed the devil in hell. Turned him into a big black snake and keeps him under her spell.